Jane Belseca sat in the dirt by the highway on the outskirts of San Miguel de Allende. A cop helped her strip away the duct tape around her hands and feet as he told her that her husband's kidnappers had escaped. She tried to staunch the blood from her injured finger, gashed on that barbed wire fence. She tried to tamp down the terror that grabbed at her throat, because she knew what had happened to others.
My husband was kidnapped on 2001.
This woman had already told her horrifying story.
And every time that we tell them that we don't have the money, so they cut a finger and they send us the finger.
But that was Mexico City, one of the kidnapping capitals of the world, where Jane had heard that thousands are snatched every year, wealthy and poor, from mansions, the backs of taxis, from taco stands.
The kidnapping situation in Mexico is outrageous.
This woman, Ana Maria Salazar, had been reporting it for years on TV, the breakdown of law and order, the mess in police forces.
You don't have a criminal justice system that has the ability to go after all these people. But the other problem is corruption. There's corrupt cops at the federal level, there's corrupt cops at the state level, and there's corrupt cops at the municipal level. People just don't trust their cops.
Which is why, she says, so many kidnappings go unreported, making it impossible to know just how many thousands take place in Mexico. But this was safe little San Miguel, where Eduardo had always said,
"Do you think anybody's going to come out here in the country? That's not going to happen."
But it had happened, and all she could think of was finding help fast.
I'm sitting there in the dirt, in need of stitches, and at that point I have 2 cell phones going.
But why? Wouldn't the police just take over? Well, no, not in Mexico. Jane herself, in this supremely vulnerable moment, would have to decide which police, if any, she could trust to get her husband back.
You can allow the local or state police to handle the situation. You can go to the Mexican equivalent of the FBI, which is the AFI, or AFI, as they're called here, and let them handle it on a federal level. Or you can go to a private consultant that you have to pay out of your own pocket, and they will negotiate it privately.
You don't know what to do when someone is saying, "Hey, I'm selling you back your daughter."
Jane had heard about other kidnappings, like the one 7 years earlier when kidnappers snatched this man's 25-year-old daughter, and in minutes he had to make the impossible decision.
I knew I should go with the police. The problem was, which police? One of the toughest gangs was headed by the police who was in charge of the anti-kidnapping group. So with that in mind, I knew I couldn't go with the state police.
He chose the federal police, who negotiated with the kidnappers, arranged a ransom payment, and still in the transfer could not prevent the murder of his daughter. What was Jane to do? She'd heard all the stories. Sometimes police themselves were involved in kidnappings.
I knew that there was a possibility that, yes, there were people that were perhaps right there with me that I could not trust.
Right, and you'd know that the experience of well-heeled people had been, go to this private organization, it'll take care of you.
Right.
So as cars whizzed by and the dirt-caked blood dried on her skin, Jane placed calls all around the world to private companies that specialize in kidnap negotiation.
They knew all the questions to ask. They said, how many vehicles were involved? What did the note say? Can you describe the people? What did their guns look like?
Must be a sophisticated operation, they told Jane. Negotiating would be difficult and expensive, at least $2,500 a day plus expenses, far more than she could afford. She wondered, could the state police help her? She asked them how successful they'd been solving kidnappings.
They said, oh yeah, we've resolved 100%. And I said, really? So, does that mean you got 100% of the victims back and you caught the bad guys? And they said, yes. Eventually, we've gotten all of them. It really made me feel very uneasy and untrusting, because I know that 100% of the parking violations don't get resolved.
There was only one choice left. The Mexican version of the FBI, the AFI, or AFI, the elite unit of the federal police. which might at least get Eduardo back alive. So she made the call, went back to the ranch, cleaned up her wounds, and braced herself to tell the children. The two youngest would be satisfied temporarily with the story about Eduardo being on a business trip, but not Fernando, then 12. He had to be told, and anyway, she needed him now.
It was very, very tough. Try explaining to a child that his father's just been stolen for money. The hardest thing I've ever had to do.
I had never seen my mom like that. She looked like if the worst thing happened to her.
He's grown fast since his father was kidnapped. Even so, for his own safety, we're hiding his face.
I asked her, was it by criminals or what do you mean taken? And she said he was kidnapped. And that's all she said. And I just stood quiet. I couldn't believe it.
How did he take it?
I was devastated. I just said to him, you have to know that I will do everything humanly possible to get your father back. If it takes everything we have, everything I can humanly do.
Fernando was just a boy, but not for much longer. He fled to a special spot, his private place, away from the house.
I got on my motorcycle and went up to this rock. It's a pretty big rock and it overlooks our ranch. I just started crying.
It was later when he learned this was likely the place the kidnappers used to spy on his family. He never went back. Now, it was evening.
I'm hoping that I'll get home like they've told me. I'll open the email. There will be a message. And whatever I have access to, they can have it all. Okay? Just give it back. So I'm at that point hoping this is going to be an open and shut deal in less than 24 hours.
Jane got ready for the arrival of the federal AFI agent. The federal police had promised he'd move in right away and live on the ranch until he got Eduardo back. She felt like she was waiting for the cavalry to arrive. She let hope grow.
I expected him to roll in some kind of bulletproof Suburban, be big and burly and hopefully a little mature, and having done this quite a while.
And then, finally, at 3 a.m., the AFI agent called. Could someone come and pick him up in town, he asked. He had come from Mexico City by bus.
He looked like a high school or maybe freshman in college student with a backpack, a baseball cap, glasses, tiny. And I thought, what is going on? You mean this is what you're sending me to deal with this? And so the first thing I asked him after shaking his hand was, are you armed? And he said no. And I said, why not, for God's sake?
Seasoned criminals had engineered a seamless plan to steal her husband. And all she had on her side was a short, skinny kid with no apparent backup, no car, and no gun.